Hey guys, this is Adam Feldman with the Feldman Law Firm. What I want to talk to you about today, we're getting a lot of questions about the difference really between reasonable suspicion and probable cause as it relates to the criminal world, more specifically traffic stops, but it does bleed into different aspects. So I want to kind of cover this in the best way so that anybody else who's not a lawyer can understand it. And the problem is that the difference between the two is actually, it's a very, very thin line. There's not that much of a difference between the two when considering what's what. So the way it really breaks down is reasonable suspicion is the lowest level of a legal standard where police can really do anything. And the idea is it's associated with a stop and frisk. So reasonable suspicion is nothing more than an articulable suspicion. So it's not a hunch. I mean, when you think of a hunch, you're just saying, that guy looks like he might be up to no good. And that doesn't count for reasonable suspicion. It's just that little step more. So, I mean, the cops will incorporate a whole lot of information that most of the time really is bogus. But for example, you are in a quote unquote high crime neighborhood, which to most of us means nothing. That could be my neighborhood that has since been branded by some police officer as high crime, and therefore they now have this reasonable suspicion to do what? To stop you. They can stop you and say, hey man, what's going on? What's happening here? Now at this level of reasonable suspicion, that's really what allows the officer to start saying, I want to frisk you. I want to check you for drugs, something to that effect. So it incorporates the totality of circumstances. It's based off of an idea, but something that this police officer has to be able to articulate. High crime neighborhood. The individual potential suspect is looking suspicious, sweating a lot when you're in the middle of the winter, just because the police came up, eyes darting back and forth. These are things, I haven't described anything that's criminal, but this is all reasonable suspicion that the police officer can articulate when it comes down to stopping you. And when that stop takes place, they then have the ability to arguably frisk you, check for drugs, check for firearms, what have you. But the biggest question here for anybody who is subject to a reasonable suspicion, frisk or stop or anything like that is, am I being detained? That should always be the first question, because just because a police officer interacts with you, just because a police officer comes to you and says, hey man, what's going on? Or hey, can I check you for drugs? Or hey, do you have a gun on you? These are simply questions. Police can go around the neighborhood asking people questions. It doesn't mean that you have to comply. And so with reasonable suspicion, this gives them that next step to actually detain you. So it's very important for anybody who's interacting with police to very politely and very calmly ask, hey, am I being detained? If they don't answer the question, you are not being detained and you can walk away. If they tell you that you are being detained, well, the best advice is to comply. Because if they are detaining you and then you start running away, giving reason for chase, you're really only going to compound the circumstances and probably put yourself in some more trouble. So reasonable suspicion is articulable facts that allow this officer to really just stop you, quote unquote, detain you, ask you some questions, frisk you even, check for drugs, weapons, or any criminal contraband. And this is really important, reasonable suspicion alone, you cannot arrest somebody. That's probably the biggest distinction between where we're going next, which is now probable cause. So reasonable suspicion, you can walk up to somebody, frisk, ask questions, but you cannot arrest on reasonable suspicion alone. Then we move to probable cause. Now this is where things can start getting a little hairy for the suspect, because at the time of probable cause, now we're really invoking the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. We are all free from search and from seizure to be secure in our person, our houses, papers, effects, all those things associated with the Fourth Amendment, and we have that freedom. But probable cause allows the officer to move past that and effectuate an arrest. Then they can do a search warrant. They can seize your property with probable cause. So this is the idea of how this works. A traffic stop, and we always deal with this a lot with DUIs. Police officers pull you over, and more often than not, it's for, let's say, speeding or an expired, registration, something that is civil, right? They can't ask you to get out of the car simply because they pulled you over. Just because you're there for a speeding ticket, that gives them right to say, hey, let me see your license and registration. So they have probable cause at that point, really only to believe that you committed a civil traffic infraction, so they're only allowed to act according to that. So civil traffic infraction, and then what we always see is it moves from I pulled you over for a speeding ticket to now I have probable cause or even reasonable suspicion of a DUI. That's what we always see. So an officer pokes his head in, starts sniffing around, looks at your eyes, they're bloodshot, watery, asks you some questions, you're now talking, and he can smell the alcohol in your breath. He can see that your face is a little flushed, or he can tell that your words sound a little slow or slurred. You are now building reasonable suspicion, which is eventually going to turn to probable cause, and this is how this works. So at that point, the officer says, well, why don't you step on out of the car? He doesn't have to tell you why, but in his mind, he has to know why. Well, I smelled alcohol in the breath, bloodshot, watery eyes, slurred speech. It's got that reasonable suspicion that you might be committing a DUI. You get out of the car, and he starts doing these tests. The eye test, where he's got that pen, and you're supposed to follow it with your eyes, or the walk and turn, or the touch your nose, or do your ABCs, all of that stuff. What he's doing is he took a reasonable suspicion of a DUI, simply the smell of alcohol, and he's turning it into probable cause for arrest. And that's why we always tell everybody, if you're ever stopped for a DUI, you crack the window, you give them your license and registration, because you don't want to give the police officer probable cause. It's okay if they have, it's okay if they stopped you for a civil traffic violation. They have to let you go, give you the citation and let you go. But the more interaction you have with police, which you don't have to do, gives them probable cause to ultimately arrest you. So reasonable suspicion starts off with that smell, and then the officer starts doing all of these tests, and he's taking notes. All right, he missed his, he lost his balance on the stand on one leg. He can't touch his nose, right on the nose. He's an inch off. His eyes, he's showing cues of nystagmus, meaning your eyes are showing that you're impaired. Things like that. All of a sudden, he is just putting each one of these things, and he now has probable cause. So probable cause allows him to do that seizure of you, which is putting you under arrest. So that's really my attempt to describe the difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause so everybody can understand it. Reasonable suspicion is good for a stop. It's good to ask some questions, even frisk somebody, not enough to arrest. But then they have to start building their case to create probable cause. And truth is that you are the one who's giving them that evidence when it comes to a DUI stop, for example, by continuing to do the tests, by continuing to speak with them, doing all of these things that you don't have to do simply because they're asking. So I hope this helps clear up the difference between reasonable suspicion, probable cause. It is a difficult legal standard to really break down and to truly understand, but if you have any questions, I am always available. I give you my cell phone, 602-540-7887. You can call me, you can text me, you can email me, whatever you need. If you're having any issues distinguishing between the two, or you've been arrested and you're trying to figure out, did they have probable cause for the arrest? I mean, these are questions I answer on a daily basis. It's a free consultation, and we don't charge you for this simple conversation. So I hope the information helps. If you're still left with questions, give me a call, drop me a line, and we'll talk more about it. Thanks so much for paying attention today.